The afternoon sun hung low over Blue Ridge Regional, the kind of small airport that smelled like avgas and rain-baked asphalt, where the windsock creaked on a tired bearing and the fence along the public viewing area wore a lacework of fingerprints from generations of kids who had pressed their hands to the chain links and dreamed upward. That fence, with its dull zinc glint and the faded "Do Not Enter" Air Operations Area placards, was where Malik Carter stood with a spiral notebook tucked against his chest. He was 16, long-limbed and quiet, with the careful gaze of someone who kept more than he said. His hair was neatly tapered. His sneakers were scuffed at the toes from bracing himself on tip, always trying to snag one more inch of sky. He wrote down tail numbers, sketched airframes, and timed rotations like a pianist hearing a metronome only he could sense. Where the world saw metal and procedure, Malik saw choreography. A Cessna 172 lifted, nose steady, main wheels kissing air, and he whispered, "Rotate at 65 knots," to no one but the breeze. The L-19 down the taxiway chattered as its prop idled, waiting on clearance that would come in a voice Malik knew by sound. Tower, even here, was just a person in a glass box. 17 right cleared for departure. He could hear the cadence in his head. He had his phone in one hand, not to post, not for clout, just to capture the way sunlight scaled the curvature of a leading edge and slid off like water. He wanted to hold the light long enough to study it later. Pilots knew. See first, then fly. That was how his father taught him to look at things. He turned a page in his notebook and began a sketch of a Piper Seneca with the registration N532Q. It had taxied in earlier, and Malik had caught the flash of a wristwatch inside, the captain raising his hand to block the sun as he swung into the stand. The watch had snagged Malik's attention. The pilot's movement had been precise, practiced, almost military. He wrote "Hail" under the tail number. He liked giving pilots names, even before he knew their actual ones. It made them human. Inside the Seneca, Captain Richard Hale retightened his harness, checked the EGTs, and scanned the ramp with the quick, methodical sweep that had kept him alive and employed for 30 years. He was 58, precise, and set in the angles of a man who had learned to bend only under necessity. He caught himself looking toward the fence again. The boy. He'd noticed him when they taxied in, phone up, writing in a notebook, eyes trained on the cockpit during the run-up. It had unsettled him, prickling at the back of his neck. Observe, assess, mitigate, the mantra of every checklist he'd ever loved. The boy stayed there through refueling, through the quick turn. Still writing, watching. Hale's first officer, Lena Torres, slid a bottle of water into the cup holder and followed Hale's gaze. "He's plane spotting," she said. "You know there's a whole subreddit for kids like that. They memorize liveries like baseball cards." Hale's jaw worked. "He's not just spotting, he's recording procedures." "Or drawing airplanes," Lena said lightly. "Torres, paranoia is what keeps aluminum in the sky." "Caution is. Paranoia scrapes paint off souls," she murmured, but softly, because this was Hale's cockpit, and there were hierarchies that mattered even when they shouldn't. Outside, Malik shifted for a better angle. He lifted his phone again, zooming to catch the Seneca's prop blur. He didn't notice the way Hale stiffened at the gesture. He didn't know the specific hard edges that lived in Hale's mind. A bomb threat at JFK in 2003, a loose panel at FL 180 in 2009 that made him swear he smelled arcing insulation for a month. An anonymous note once left in a crew lounge that said, "You fly, you die," which had been a stupid prank but had burrowed into his sleep like a tick. Hale toggled the radio back to ground frequency, then to tower, then back, as if the hiss between channels could wash away unease. It didn't. He looked again. The boy raised his phone. Hale picked up the ramp phone and told the lineman he wanted to report suspicious activity. He avoided the word boy. He used male, teenager recording checklists, south fence line. He spoke the cautious language of liability. "I'm not saying anything is wrong, but," he said, "could you send someone to check?" He did not think about how quickly those neutral words could gather heat as they rolled. The lineman called the airport ops desk. Ops called county dispatch. A voice in a windowless room answered with the rhythm of 100 such calls. The logs were updated. A black Chevy Tahoe idled 2 blocks away. 2 officers sat inside finishing lukewarm coffees. It took them 80 seconds to accept the dispatch. Malik turned the page and wrote, "Sunset crosswind. Watch rudder work." He was thinking about how a plane feels the invisible, how a pilot must trust instruments and still keep his skin in. The game, hands ready to contradict gauges when the gut knows better. His father used to say, "Know the book, respect it, but believe your bones too." He never heard the Tahoe until it was already rolling to a stop behind him. "Hands where we can see them," the officer said through the open window. Not cruelly, not kindly, but with that roughened authority that makes a command sound like an old habit. He and his partner stepped out. Their badges flashed and then hung still. Malik turned, lifted his hands automatically, the notebook sliding down his chest. "Sir," he said. His voice did a weird thing, tightened around the single syllable like it might shard. "Gotta report you're recording aircraft procedures," the second officer said, the one whose jaw tightened when he said procedures like it rhymed with threats. "We need to ask you some questions." Malik blinked, then shook his head in that small, automatic way kids do when the world has gone crooked. "I'm just drawing. I'm just plane spotting." "ID?" the first officer said. "I'm 16, Malik said. "Name, then." "Malik Carter." He could feel every vowel as if he'd suddenly drilled them into his bones, as if he might not be allowed to wear them anymore. "You out here alone?" the second officer asked. "My dad's at work," Malik said. "He's on a call. He knows I'm here. I come here all the time." He swallowed. "I can call him." "Don't reach for your phone," the first officer said reflexively, and a thin wire of fear touched the back of Malik's throat, because it wasn't just the words, it was the world that had taught those words to carry a history like a loaded bag. "Okay," Malik said softly. He kept his hands visible, open, like 2 small flags of truce. The wind rucked the edges of his notebook. The first officer glanced to the ramp, to the Seneca, to the pilot who stood on the lower step of his ladder pretending to check a fuel cap while watching. Hale's eyes slid from the boy to the officers and back again, water in a mouth that wouldn't swallow. "Flip the notebook," the second officer said. "What are you writing?" "It's just," Malik started, but the officer had already lifted it lightly by a corner. He read N5312Q. EGT peaked high, rotate 65, left crosswind correction. His mouth drew into a line. "You see?" he muttered to his partner. The first officer, older, with hair gone white at the edges, looked harder. He flipped back a few pages. There were sketches, messy and beautiful. Arrows annotated, aileron into wind, nosewheel shimmy. There were entire pages of aircraft silhouettes, the kind of obsessive hand that comes from love. "This is spotting," the older officer said, quiet but certain. "Could still be reconnaissance," the second said. "Reconnaissance of what?" Malik asked, the question breaking out of him before he could edit it for safety. "Of wheels and light angles? Of a kid who wants to be in the sky?" "Words aren't proof, son," the second officer said, and though the word son was habit and not claim, it landed on Malik like a weight. "Can I call my father?" Malik asked. "Please." The officers looked at each other. The older one nodded. "Slow. Use speaker." Malik lifted his phone as if it might spook. He scrolled to Dad and pressed. On the third ring, a voice picked up. Warm, baritone, clipped by a certain professional habit that never entirely left. "You good, kid?" "Dad," Malik said, and the grip he had on his voice slipped for a second. Police are here. Someone said I was doing something with the planes. Silence stretched thin on the line. Then, put me on speaker. The older officer stepped forward. Sir, this is Officer Green with County Sheriffs. We received a report from a pilot concerned about security. We're just checking. The voice on the phone measured itself into the air. I appreciate that. I'm Marcus Carter. My son's been going to Blue Ridge since he was 8. You can ask Ops. They know him. Another measure of silence. I'm on my way. You don't need to, Green began. I'm on my way, Marcus repeated, and this time the certainty in it had an edge, but not an angry one, a professional one, the sound of a person who understood systems and would arrive with them in his pocket. He hung up. Green exhaled. All right, let's just step to the bench while we wait, okay? Malik nodded. He sat. The notebook lay open beside him, wine-teasing pages. From the ramp, Captain Hale watched the boy's shoulders hunch and felt something cold move behind his ribs. Lena Torres watched Hale. This is escalating because you chose fear, she said quietly. It's not fear. It's caution, Hale said. The difference, Lena said, is who pays for it. I'm not trying to make anyone pay. Intent doesn't immunize impact, she said. Hale pressed his lips together and looked again at the boy on the bench. His own hands remembered a different 16, the cheap wood of a rural diner table, his father squeezing his shoulder and saying, "Man up," when a cop's flashlight rude tapped the window during a traffic stop. Different lives, different stakes, but Hale's bones. Remembered being seen as a question mark instead of a period. He watched the boy's face go deliberately blank the way young faces do when their feelings aren't safe in public. A black Genesis rolled into the lot with government plates that didn't shout, but knew how to be heard. A man stepped out wearing a navy suit with the jacket open and a tie still knotted like the day had more work in it. He had the bearing of someone who knew both how to find a rule and how to bend one without breaking it. He was not tall, but he carried height anyway, the way some people carry weather. Mr. Carter, Green said, standing. Marcus nodded to him, eyes flicking to the notebook, to his son, to the officers, to the ramp. He took exactly 3 seconds to see the geometry of the moment. He knelt by Malik. You okay? He asked. And though his voice was level, his hand hovered near Malik's forearm, heat without touch. I didn't do anything, Dad, Malik said, and the brittle in anything was the worst sound Marcus had heard in a year of hearings and briefings and middle-of-the-night calls when a runway light wouldn't light in Topeka and a medevac needed it. Marcus stood and turned to the officers. Who called this in? Pilot on the ramp, Green said, nodding toward the Seneca. Marcus didn't look yet. He kept his eyes on Green. And Ops? Did they confirm any policy violations here? Green shook his head. No violations. We're following up on a suspicious activity report. Of a kid sketching airplanes, Marcus said. He didn't raise his voice. He bent it so you could hear what lived under it. Officer Green. Officer Green, I appreciate that you brought care to a call, but understand the chain. Language hardens when it travels, and by the time it hits a young black boy, it calcifies into fear. Green's face softened a fraction. I hear you. You can go, Marcus said quietly. I'll handle it from here. He held Green's eyes for a beat that was not disrespect, just a statement of jurisdiction laced with a truth Green recognized. There were many kinds of authority, and some were earned outside of badge or title. Understood, Green said. To his partner, we're clear. They walked back to the Tahoe. Only then did Marcus turn toward the ramp. Captain Hale was already walking over, Lena half a step behind him. Hale's stride had an old athlete's straightness to it, and his face wore a brittle neutrality that looked like glass. He stopped 10 feet short, just far enough for politeness to provide coverage if anyone needed to retreat under it. You the father? He asked. I'm the father, Marcus said. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't withhold. One either. He waited. I'm Richard Hale, Hale said. I called it in. I know, Marcus said. Thank you for confirming. Hale's eyes flicked to Malik and back. Your son was recording my run-up. My son was drawing your airplane, Marcus said. He said my son as if it were a credential. Hale glanced at the notebook. He saw the tail number, the notes. He saw the neatness of the handwriting, the care of it. He saw his own caution reflected back at him and didn't like the shape of it. You can understand, he said, why I might be concerned. Concern is rational, Marcus said. So is inquiry. But you didn't ask a question. You dialed an authority with guns. Lena watched the line where apology should appear. She willed it into being with her eyes. It didn't materialize yet. I followed protocol, Hale said. Protocol is a floor, not a ceiling, Marcus said. And sometimes a trap door. Hale bristled. Look, I don't know you. I don't know your son. That's true, Marcus said. Let me fix the first part. He reached into his jacket slowly, the choreography deliberate. He produced an ID badge. He passed it to Hale because some conversations require props. The badge read, Federal Aviation Administration. Underneath, Marcus D. Carter, Administrators, Office. Smaller text, Acting Administrator, a position that had become more permanent in function than in name. Silence swept the space. You could hear a little flight school Cessna run up down the row. The prop wash rattled a loose bit of chain link in the fence. Hale's eyes hit the words, then hit them again to make sure they weren't jokes. He looked up and found zero pleasure in Marcus's face. Sir, Hale started, then stopped, because all the words in his mouth wanted to rush to, I didn't mean, and you have to understand, and it's complicated, and none of those were actually answers. He tried again. I'm sorry. For what? Marcus asked. It wasn't cruel. It was surgical. For assuming, Hale said. He peeled the word carefully. For using the fastest tool in reach instead of the right one. For making your son carry the weight of my caution. The last word said itself, like it was ashamed of the euphemism it stood in for. Marcus studied his face. You can tell when an apology is a tactic and when it's a hinge. This one looked tired and true. Still, hinges must prove they turn. Malik, Marcus said without breaking eye contact with Hale, tell Captain Hale what you were doing. Malik lifted his voice carefully. I was drawing, he said, and listening, trying to match. The sound of the prop with the notes on the EGT. I want to fly. Someday. He swallowed. I like the way the Seneca looks in crosswind. Like it's thinking. Hale turned to him and for the first time actually saw him. Not a vague male shape at a fence line, not a security note, but a boy with a language for sky. It grazed something in Hale's chest. He opened his mouth and found a piece of his own 16 still inside it. The Seneca talks, yeah, he said softly. She tells you where the wind is if you listen. Little right rudder in the climb, else she'll yaw all day. Malik's eyes flicked up. I wrote that, he said, surprised into a small smile. Lena, cut in, voice warm. Would it help if we showed him the cockpit? Let him see we have nothing to hide? Maybe give this a better ending than the one we're headed toward? Hale looked at her. Lena's eyebrows did this small, persuasive dance that had coaxed 4 gate agents and 2 bristly dispatchers into human kindness in the last month alone. He nodded. Yeah, he said. He looked at Marcus. If that's okay with you. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was rationing. Yes, he said, but not instead of accountability. Not instead, Hale said. Maybe, alongside. They crossed the short stretch of pavement to the Seneca. The heat came up off it in waves. The aluminum smelled like a sun-baked penny. Hale dropped the ladder and gestured. Watch your head, he said by reflex. Malik climbed like someone entering a chapel. The cockpit was both more cramped and more infinite than he'd imagined. The Garmin G600 screens glowed. The yoke wore the small polished planes Acquire wear. Hands worry them. Lena slid into the right seat and patted the jump seat behind them. See the mixture? She said, pointing. Red knob. Richer for takeoff. Lean for cruise. The EGTs tell you if you've gone too far. I heard the change, Malik said. The note. Lena grinned. Pilot ears. Hale hovered behind them, suddenly awkward in his own cockpit. You can touch the yoke, he said, and then, realizing the boy's hands had already folded themselves against the polite thought of not, if you want, just gently. Malik rested his fingers there. He felt the ghost of control in it, the way a tool holds memory, and the way memory holds you right back. He exhaled and didn't realize until then he'd been holding breath like contraband. Marcus stood at the foot of the ladder and watched his son. He watched his son's shoulders drop into ease the way shoulders do when they realize they're exactly where they are meant to be. He looked at Hale, then at Lena, and the line of his mouth softened. From the hangar shadows, a few faces had begun to appear, drawn by the theater of official cars and uniforms and the slow de-escalation that follows. Donna Gray, the airport manager, walked over, paperwork tucked against her hip like a shield. Mr. Carter, she said. Marcus turned. Donna. He smiled tiredly. I told you I'd try to sneak in without an entourage. We're always glad to see you with or without headlines, she said. She looked at the tableau, the boy in the cockpit, the pilot's posture. She connected dots. We need to talk about how we handle these calls, she said, not accusatory, just administrative. Because this was seconds from going wrong. Marcus nodded. We can talk today, he said. He glanced toward Malik and back. And then we can talk longer. Donna's mouth quirked. I'll bring coffee, she said. She looked at Hale. Captain, you okay if we do a quick after-action with ops? Not discipline, debrief. Hale swallowed. Yes, he said. He felt the heat of shame, and also the cool of being allowed to do something with it besides drown. They reconvened in the little conference room at the edge of the terminal, fluorescent lights humming, a framed poster of an SR-71 fading on the wall. Ops pulled the radio logs. Green, the older officer, came back in, not to menace, but to help. Shoulder. Lena perched on the edge of a chair, Malik beside her, notebook open like a passport at a border. Let's map the chain, Marcus said. What words got said, how they traveled, where they picked up speed they shouldn't have. He drew boxes and arrows on a legal pad. Hale owned his part first. I said recording procedures, he admitted. I didn't say drawing. I didn't walk over to ask. I escalated by outsourcing the question to someone with a badge. Why? Donna asked gently. Hale stared at his hands. I've been on edge, he said. Long time flying. Some scares. You get a catalog of bad things that can happen, and it can become your lens. Trauma is data, Marcus said. But it's not the whole spreadsheet. Green spoke up. Dispatch coded it as suspicious, which is right. But on arrival, we could have slowed. We went right to hands where we can see them. He rubbed his jaw. That's habit. Not always the right one in a non-detained public area with a minor. Language matters, Donna said, writing arrival script on a whiteboard. We can make a script for approach. Hey there, we got a call. Mind telling us what you're up to? De-escalatory framing. Also community familiarity, Lena said. If Ops knows Malik, write it down. A little airport library card for plane spotters. Doesn't exempt anyone from rules, but it gives a context. Malik looked. Down! I don't want special treatment, he said quietly. You don't have to want it for the system to give it or take it away. Marcus said, not unkindly. The question is, how do we design the system so that everyone gets context before... Consequence? Hale's eyes lifted to Marcus. I'm sorry, he said again, but this time he anchored it. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry I put your son in a position to fear me when I'm supposed to be the guy who respects the sky enough to respect its watchers. Marcus nodded once. Thank you. He let the words hang and be. Then, what happens next? Donna flipped the whiteboard marker in her fingers. We draft a policy. We train. We add spotter orientation to our community day. We pair kids with pilots who ask before they assume. We make a habit of walking toward people. Lena's eyes sparked. And we put Malik in the sim, she said. We see if his ears are as good as I think. Malik's head snapped up. The sim? Donna grinned. The college's aviation program has a decent one. I can call. Marcus looked at his son, and for a second the tempo of the room slowed enough to let something more intimate through. You up for it? He asked. Malik nodded, small and fierce. Yes, he said. Please. They drove across town to the community college, the Genesis and the Seneca crew, and Donna's Subaru making a strange parade. The sim lab smelled like old carpet and new plastic, fluorescent lighting against dark screens. Professor Whitman, whose mustache looked like a command decision from 1984 he refused to rescind, shook Marcus's hand and eyed the group with a mix of suspicion and glee. This is unusual, he said. We're writing a better ending in real time, Donna replied. You in? Always, Whitman said. He ushered them into the room with the Frasca sim. Okay, kid, he said to Malik. Let's see if your hands have ears. Malik slid into the left seat of the mock cockpit. Lena took right. Whitman tapped the screen alive and made a day of calm winds and good light. Blue Ridge traffic, Seneca 5312 Quebec, taking runway 17 right, Lena intoned, playing the tower and the world. Cleared for takeoff, Malik swallowed. His fingers went to the throttle, hesitant, then finding a rhythm. He'd watched thousands of rotations. You could know every line in a book and still have your first step feel like stepping onto a river. He pushed the throttle forward. The sim hummed. The gauges climbed. Right rudder, he whispered to himself. He felt the yaw like someone tugging at his sleeve and corrected. At 65, he eased back. The horizon slipped. The ground became memory. Nice, Whitman murmured. Judgment carefully rationed. Praise tucked under the words like cushioning. Lena pointed. Trim, scan. A little more right rudder. Don't chase the compass, chase the feeling. Malik found it. The plane, fake plane, but it didn't matter, talked. And he answered, and they discussed the sky in a language he'd been learning at a fence line with a pencil for years. He flew the pattern, turned base, lined up an approach a little high, corrected with the modesty of a person who doesn't yet know if he's allowed to be smooth. He flared a touch late, felt the thump, and laughed from surprise at his own joy. Through the glass, Hale watched, something loosening in his chest. He remembered the first time he'd leveled off at 3,000 AGL and realized he had gone where his 6th grade textbook had never promised him. He remembered being a kid listening to the wind confess its intentions as it slid past metal. He remembered he had once been generous. He felt the ache of having forgotten. When the sim powered down, Malik sat still a long second, hands lightly on his thighs as if he were telling his body, remember this. Lena grinned and high-fived him. Whitman cleared his throat and said, I've seen worse first approaches from licensed students, which in his dialect meant fantastic. Marcus put a hand on Malik's shoulder. You did good, he said softly. Outside in the parking lot, the day had slanted toward evening, shadows lengthening like cooling iron. Hale walked over to Marcus. I want to do something, he said. Not just say I'm sorry and go on. Is there a program, A scholarship? Something for flight training? I can... He stopped, wary of the optics of penance as patronage. Not just for Malik, he added quickly. For a cohort, for kids who stand at fences and want in. Marcus assessed him for a beat, then nodded. There's an FAA industry, fund for community pipeline programs. We're trying to expand it. A pilot-led partnership would help. Then I'll call people, Hale said. Give it my name. Give it my hours. Whatever credibility I have left, I'll spend some of it there. Credibility is not a finite bank, Marcus said. It's a muscle. You strengthen it where you tore it. They met again a week later. Donna, Ops, Green, Whitman, Lena, Hale, and 3 kids from the local high school who had been caught at the fence with notebooks and shooed away by a bored security guard last spring. They called the effort From Fence to Flight Line. It wasn't slick. It worked. They made laminated badges for spotters, a little photo, a list of do's and don'ts, a line that read, "Ask me what I'm learning," to turn suspicion into conversation. They trained ramp crews to wave kids over, behind the line, but closer, to explain what a chalk does, why a tie-down matters, how a pre-flight isn't superstition but love. They wrote a script for responding officers that began with, "How can I help you enjoy the airport safely?" They held a Saturday Sky School once a month, where kids who could already identify a Pratt & Whitney by ear learned to translate that love into checklists. Captain Hale came to the first one with a box of old approach plates and the humility of a man who knows redemption requires repetition. He told the story, not to exonerate himself, but to make it heavy enough that others would feel it lift. Malik stood by him and told his part. The ache in his throat when a command made his hands feel like contraband. The way the sim had made a new door in his life. The way an apology felt like weather finally breaking. They didn't pretend the world would be different everywhere because it was different here. They simply decided this stretch of asphalt in North Carolina would learn the shape of its own mistakes and then build something beautiful over the outline. In the spring, Malik started ground school through a scholarship named for the first airport. Janitor who had let him sit in a hangar once when a thunderstorm made the fence dangerous. He studied weather with a grazer's appetite, cirrus and cumulonimbus, and the lies they tell, learned to read metars like haiku. He took the written and passed. Whitman grinned and called it a strong pass, which in his dialect meant excellent. On a wind-tossed afternoon in May, he climbed into a real 172 with an instructor named Asha, who had the steady patience of someone who had taught dozens of students exactly how to be gentle with their own ambition. He did 3 patterns and didn't disgrace himself. A week later, Asha stepped out on the taxiway, leaned through the window and said, "How do you feel about flying this one alone?" Malik stared at her. Now, she said. Or never. And never is banned here. He taxied out with his heart beating the way a trapped bird beats before it remembers it's a bird and not a thought. Blue Ridge traffic, Cessna 891, Lima Charlie, departing 17 right. His voice, mic'd and public, didn't crack. He lined up. He breathed. He fed in throttle, right rudder. 65. He eased the yoke. And then there was that moment where wheels become story, when the ground no longer insists you belong to it. He climbed and the town folded under him like a map, a water tower, a high school baseball diamond, the ribbon of a creek. He turned crosswind, downwind, base, final. He flared earlier this time, felt the main wheels brush the pavement with gratitude instead of surprise. On his second circuit, he caught the merest nibble of crosswind and corrected a small dance of foot and hand that felt like speaking his own, named correctly in a place that had mispronounced it before. His third landing was a love letter to everything he'd learned to trust. When he taxied back, Asha wiped at her eyes and blamed the wind. Whitman shook his hand with a solemnity that felt like midnight air. Donna blew a party horn she'd hidden specifically for this. Green, off-duty and sheepish about it, gave him a thumbs up like a dad. Lena hugged him with pilot-to-pilot permission. Captain Hale stood a little apart, hands in pockets. When Malik stepped over, Hale cleared his throat. I, brought you something. He held out a small box. Inside was a watch, not flashy, practical, the kind that could be read in turbulence. It's not a bribe, Hale said, color touching his face. It's something I wish someone had given me when I first flew alone. So I'd remember every second counts, and some of them you don't get again. Malik lifted the watch and turned it, the light catching. Thank you, he said. I'll set it to Zulu. Hale laughed, relieved. Good, then you're already a better pilot than I was at your age. What you were at my age, Malik said, was a kid at a fence once, right? Hale looked out toward the line where chain link met sky. The windsock twitched. He nodded. Yeah, he said. I just forgot. Marcus watched the exchange with the particular ache of a father who knows he can protect his child from almost everything except the exact moments that will make him who he is. He felt gratitude that this one had come back round with soft edges and a runway light at the end. There were still calls sometimes. Someone new would see a kid by the fence with a phone and feel that prickle. But now the calls came to Donna or to Ops first. And the first question was, what are you learning? And the first offer was a lanyard with a badge that said Spotter and a smile that said Belong. In July, the From Fence to Flightline program made the local paper, then a national aviation blog, then the regional FAA newsletter. The headline writers, like headline writers do, made poetry and puns and sometimes mess. They missed the point in small ways and hit it in others. The point was never the headline. The point was Malik getting to throw his voice into a radio frequency and hear the world answer him back like a friend. The point was a pilot learning that caution that harms is just fear in uniform. The point was a father who held power using it like a lantern instead of a weapon. Autumn came. Malik started his junior year with a private pilot's handbook tucked into his backpack alongside calculus and literature. He and Asha planned for his solo cross-country. He and Whitman argued joyfully about whether the Cherokee had more soul than the Cessna. He and Lena traded texts about energy management and how landing is just a controlled stall that you consent to. One evening, after the sun had slid under the line of pines and the runway lights were little blue jewels, Malik stayed by the fence longer than usual. The air had that sharp, clean edge it gets in fall, the kind that makes sound travel truer. He heard steps on the gravel. Hale, hands in his jacket pockets. He stood quietly beside Malik for a moment, looking out at the runway as if it were a river. When I was a kid, Hale said, there was a pilot who saw me at a fence. He didn't call the cops. He waved me over and let me smell the leather inside a Cherokee that had flown mail in the 70s. He told me I had a pilot's way of listening. He huffed a laugh. I remembered that only after I forgot it. Memory is weird like that, Malik said. Yeah, Hale said. He glanced at Malik. You planning to go all the way? To commercial? Malik asked. Yeah, maybe beyond. ATC fascinates me too. Systems, voice, authority that doesn't need volume. Hale nodded. Good. We need eyes like yours in cockpits and voices like yours in towers. They stood a while in easy silence, the kind that only exists between people who've shared something heavy and chosen not to drop it. At home that night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold and a stack of briefing papers he had no appetite for. He stared at a paragraph on runway incursion rates until the letters blurred and reorganized themselves into a memory. Malik at 8, holding his hand at the fence, asking why the windsock looked tired. He had said without thinking, "It's just telling the truth." He wondered how many truths had been told that day by people whose jobs were to lie to themselves as little as possible. He texted Green. "Thanks for today. The way you handled the debrief mattered." Green texted back a thumbs up and then, a minute later, "Always learning." Marcus looked at his son, asleep on the couch, a pen still tucked behind his ear like a promise. He knew he couldn't bubble wrap the world. He knew all he could do was keep building places where the geometry tilted slightly toward grace. Winter came. The program got funding. It faltered once. It got picked up again. Hale went to schools and talked to kids who had never seen an airplane closer than a contrail and told them the sky was not a gated community. Lena taught a Saturday on human factors where she talked about how stress warps perception and how humility can unwarp it. Whitman retired, finally, and came back the next week as an unofficial volunteer because people like him don't actually retire. They just change chairs. In March, on a day the light looked like it had been ironed, Malik took his check ride. The DPE was a woman with the gentle cruelty of someone who refuses to pass a pilot who can't be trusted with other people's mornings. Malik did his steep turns and his stalls and his emergency procedures with a mind like a metronome and a heart like a small, stubborn flame. He greased the landing. The DPE wrote a name on a temporary certificate and shook his hand. "Welcome," she said. He walked out into the ramp with the paper in his hand, and his whole life rearranged itself around a new word next to his name: pilot. Marcus hugged him, harder than Malik would have admitted he wanted, and stepped back to look. He saw the boy and the man overlapped, a transparency laid over an old map. He thought of the day at the fence, the way language can harden and the way people can soften it again. He thought about the way authority could be a ladder and not a club. Captain Hale came last. He didn't try to say anything fancy. He just tapped the little pilot wings he'd bought at the airport gift shop like a dad standing outside a t-ball field. "You earned these," he said. "No one gave you sky. You took it respectfully." Malik pinned them to his jacket like he was pinning the day to himself so he wouldn't forget it when memory went weird again. He looked out at the runway and felt a quiet he trusted. Later, when reporters inevitably asked Marcus Carter about the incident, they always called it an incident, as if it had been tidy and contained and not a whole complicated human day. He said, "A pilot called the police on my son because fear is fast and proximity is slow. Then we made proximity faster." He smiled, small and real. That's it. That's the story. But of course it wasn't it. Stories don't end. They taper and then pick up again a little to the left, with new characters or the same ones wearing different weather. Years from now, Malik would be at another airport in another town and see a kid by a fence with a notebook and a look on his face like he could hear metal thinking. He would walk over and say, "What are you learning?" He would watch the kid's shoulders come down a half-inch. He would remember the watch on his wrist and reset it to Zulu after daylight saving made fools of everyone. He would fly and, somewhere, an old habit would reach for a phone to call a badge and then pause, slow enough to ask a question instead. That pause would be the difference. That pause would be the apology that learned how to live in the world. That pause would be the small hinge on which a door swings quietly and a boy walks through.